This lake is hiding an ancient city. You can't see it now, but 4 years ago, the waters fell and this emerged. This is Kamun, a 3,400-year-old Bronze Age city in Iraqi Kurdistan. Enormous walls, a royal palace, monumental storage buildings, and archaeologists recovered an archive of more than 100 cuneiform tablets from here. I mean, this was underwater, under the Mosul Dam reservoir. Archaeologists had to race against the clock before the rains returned and water swallowed the city again a couple months later. And when they were finished, they covered up the buildings and buried them again to protect them, so they'd still be there when the next drought hit. This is a bizarre archaeological story, but Kamun is not unusual anymore. Across Britain and Ireland, drought is tracing ancient settlements and monuments into farmers' fields. In the mountains where the glaciers are, melting ice is releasing clothes, weapons, and tools lost thousands of years ago. And on this beach in England, erosion revealed human footprints nearly 1,000,000 years old. Archaeologists had about 2 weeks to record them, and then they were gone. That's the part of these stories that gets much less attention. Climate change is revealing some absolutely incredible archaeology, but increasingly, we're finding it because the environments that preserved it are disappearing. Wildfires, erosion, and the destruction of sensitive environments. So archaeologists have to adapt. Climate change presents a real opportunity for us, but one that's filled with unique challenges. This video will be filled with awe-inspiring images of mysterious ruins. But just as importantly, I want to show you how archaeologists are responding to climate change with emergency excavations, satellite monitoring, and combating the very forces of nature itself to tell our history. As they go, they're developing entirely new ways to study and protect endangered archaeological sites. Welcome to Archaeology with Flint Dibble. Let's dig into the good, the bad, and of course, the absolutely ugly of what climate change is doing to archaeology. Here in Wales, this summer has been abso-fucking-lutely brutal. Heat and drought beyond what we've ever seen. July 2026 was literally the driest July recorded here since records began all the way back in 1836, 190 years. Wales received just 9% of normal rainfall. And England next door, she broke similar records for drought. That is terrible news for farmers, rivers, wildlife, and as we'll see later, archaeology itself. But first off, drought does something else for archaeology that is frankly really cool. This is Caerhun Roman Fort in North Wales, photographed by aerial archaeologist Dr. Toby Driver on July 17th of this year. You can see the fort, but really look closely, look inside it. The drought has basically x-rayed the site for us. Those visible lines are buried Roman buildings. Or maybe there's this photo. Check it out. It's from near Lampeter. It might be my favorite of all of these. Of course, I'm biased. What you're looking at here is probably a corral for cattle from the Iron Age, roughly 2,000 years ago. I would love to study their bones. But seriously, how does this magical aerial X-ray work? Thankfully, the Royal Commission on the Ancient and Historical Monuments of Wales have created a series of lovely diagrams to show us. Check it out. Here's a nice reconstruction of a prehistoric settlement surrounded by a wall and a ditch. You see what I mean? Now, fast forward a few thousand years, and it's just an agricultural field. But during a drought, we need to think what happens, because when a wall is buried in a field, there's less soil above the masonry, so it holds less moisture and dries out more. An ancient ditch, however, does the exact opposite. The deeper soil can retain moisture, so crops above it are greener and also taller. And if you photograph these features from an airplane or drone, but only at the right time, voila, You can see the hidden archaeology for yourself. With climate change accelerating, archaeologists now need to plan for droughts. As Toby Driver told the BBC, we used to wait 5 to 7 years for a record heatwave summer for aerial archaeology, but now they come around every other year. But this isn't just about taking a cool photo, then speculating or guessing what these lines represent, and then moving on to the next project. Not at all. Dr. Toby Driver is a real scholar, and he puts the work into building rigorous scholarship on what these new images mean. And we can actually dig in and trace this research process in action, because back 8 years ago in 2018, another major drought hit Wales. And at the time, the news looked remarkably similar. Ghost gardens, ancient cemeteries, lost cities, Roman, prehistoric, and more. New sites simply appearing everywhere. Driver described it then as unlike anything he'd ever seen since taking over the Royal Commission's archaeological flying back in 1997. The recording was a mad rush. In just 3 weeks, the team flew 17 targeted surveys and took about 5,700 photographs, roughly a normal year's worth of aerial imagery. Processing those photographs ultimately produced around 200 new site discoveries. But 2 years later, when Driver and his colleagues had finished analyzing everything, they published the evidence for the Roman Wales in the journal Britannia. Here we can see what happens after that photograph went viral. Driver's team was able to settle a range of long-running debates about some of these sites and even develop hypotheses to test in the future. Take, for example, this complicated set of crop marks seen at the Carrow Hill Roman fort. It takes a trained eye to pick apart the different chronological phases of the site and what they all mean. But hey, look at this. Their plan makes it a little clearer, right? The stronger square feature in the center is the ditch circling the boundaries of the original fort. And there's a second outer ditch running around that roughly 12 meters away. What could that be? It represents the killing field known from other excavated early Roman forts. 2 different ditches. Once the enemy crosses one, they're in the killing field. But that provides a date for this one from before AD 69, comparing it to other known forts. To the east of the original fort ditch is another ditch circling a later annex or addition to the fort. And to the south, those 2 circular features you see, they are 2 prehistoric barrows or burial mounds. Interestingly, the eastern barrow has a keyhole-shaped cutting in it, suggesting it had been converted by the Romans into an oven or possibly a kiln. Moving over to Wyncliffe, the team's analysis of the crop marks solved a debate that's been raging for over 100 years. Is this building a Roman temple or a villa? What do you think? Dr. Driver notes that these new photos allow for, quote, a new site plan to be produced, while also showing that it is manifestly a villa, not a temple. Half of you got that one wrong, I bet. All right, one final example shows the potential for future research. A new stretch of Roman road was identified at Nantlon. This stretch lines up with nearly 2.5 kilometers of other newly identified stretches south of the Roman fort at Carmarthen. And when plotting it on a map of Roman Wales, they can now hypothesize that there's probably a significant unidentified Roman fort near the coast, likely near Kidwelly. The authors suggest it's perhaps under the medieval castle there, a circumstance similar to other forts. After all, why not convert the ruins of a fort into a castle? But of course, there's so much more to British archaeology than just the fucking Romans. For example, my friend, fellow archaeologist and YouTuber, Adam Morgan Ibbotson, recently photographed Newtonkime with his drone. Just look at it and go subscribe to him now. Of course, these crop marks also help us understand areas where you'd think archaeologists had already examined every square inch of the site. You know, at a place like Stonehenge. Archaeologist Mike Pitts posted these photographs on Twitter a month ago. Look at the dead grass around the stones. Now check them out through an archaeologist's eyes. Voila. The rectangular marks around the standing stones are modern excavation and re-erection pits for the standing stones. But other smaller ones represent prehistoric pits. And the largest circle there is exactly where missing stones have been hypothesized to have been standing. And this isn't a new observation caused by social media pattern spotting. No. In the dry summer of 2013, staff at Stonehenge noticed similar parch marks. Banton and colleagues mapped them and published the results the following year in Antiquity. Most intriguingly, marks appeared at the expected positions of sarsen stones 17 and 18, holes that previous geophysical surveys had failed to identify. They're in an unexcavated area. These marks strengthen the possibility that Stonehenge's outer sarsen circle really had once been complete, a raging debate among Stonehenge archaeologists. And now we move from Stonehenge to Dronehenge. This is quite possibly the best example of what happens when crop marks are combined with other cutting-edge archaeological methods, all at one of the most famous prehistoric landscapes in Europe, the Boyne Valley in Ireland. Most people know this landscape because of the enormous passage tomb at Newgrange, built around 3200 BC. But Newgrange was never sitting here by itself. Over decades of survey, archaeologists have identified a much larger ceremonial landscape around it. Tombs, monuments, and more, concentrated inside this great bend of the River Boyne. And modern remote sensing was already transforming that picture. By 2010, LiDAR had revealed several possible monuments between Newgrange and the river that were extremely difficult to recognize on the ground. But then came the drought of 2018. Anthony Murphy and Ken Williams were flying a drone over one of the parched fields south of Newgrange when this appeared. And just look at it. Amazeballs! 2 enormous concentric rings of dark dots, probably the positions of massive wooden posts surrounding a segmented circular enclosure. It quickly became famous under the nickname Dronehenge. And the detail here is extraordinary. There are 2 rings of posts and inside a causeway ditch. The National Monuments Service aerial reconnaissance team took advantage of the same drought across the wider floodplain. And suddenly, this new Dronehenge wasn't alone. The LiDAR henge we saw earlier is on the right. Dronehenge is right there in the middle. And another henge nicknamed the Univalette henge is on the left. 3 henges in a row. And over here, thousands of post holes appear to define what researchers call the Great Palisade, an enormous wooden boundary potentially enclosing not simply one monument, but a huge ceremonial precinct between the Newgrange Ridge and the River Boyne. It correlates with several geophysical anomalies, suggesting it was destroyed by fire. Altogether, by combining a range of remote sensing methods, it's possible to create a more comprehensive plan of the Boyne Valley monumental landscape, tombs, henges, and so much more. Newgrange and the Great Passage tombs belong mainly to an earlier phase of Neolithic monumental building. But in the centuries afterwards, people continued to transform this region into an enormous ritual landscape. So, that single incredible drone photograph that went viral in 2018, that wasn't simply the discovery of one lost henge. It was a piece of a larger puzzle, building on a century of excavations and survey, geophysics, LiDAR, and aerial photography that together reveal the development of this amazing place. But for sure, it was a drought that gave archaeologists, very briefly, a way to see parts of that landscape that were otherwise almost completely invisible. There's so many more similar stories to share. But before moving on from crop marks, it's useful to point out that more recent research is helping refine our methods. Researchers in Hungary have shown that whether a buried site appears at all in drought conditions depends on the soil, the vegetation, the shape of the landscape, and exactly when the rain stops. In some regions, archaeologists may have only a week or two when the archaeology becomes visible. We can see this clearly by comparing Adam Morgan Ibbetson's 2026 photo of Newtonkime Henge, which we saw before, with a photo from a few years ago. Look at it. The part of the outer ditch that doesn't show up in Adam's photo shows up here in this image from Bing Maps. But Adam's henge isn't visible at all in that photo. So increasingly, aerial archaeologists are getting better. They're refining their approach to accurately predict where and when to fly in order to capture useful snapshots from our human history, to build on earlier excavations, surveys, and photos, and to combine all these methods to provide real historical interpretations and testable hypotheses about archaeology. When the waters subside, we can finally see the world that is trapped below the surface. Rome's Tiber River is currently well below its usual level. Peeking out of the water are the remains of Nero's bridge. The name's probably wrong. Archaeologists think Caligula built it decades before Nero. And it's not the only submerged Roman bridge to appear this summer. On the Danube River, separating Bulgaria from Romania, low water levels have exposed something even bigger: Constantine's Bridge. This photo might not look super impressive, but this bridge, inaugurated in AD 328, stretched more than 2 kilometers, giving it the world's record for the longest ancient river bridge. Constantine's army marched across it to reconquer Dacia. This month, as the Danube's water level dropped, archaeologists from the Pleven Regional Museum went out on the river to investigate the visible foundations near Gigan in Bulgaria, documenting the surviving foundations and assessing their condition. And this phenomenon is global. In 2022, a stretch of the Yangtze River near Chongqing, China, fell so far that this rocky reef emerged. And if you check it out and zoom in, you can make out a trio of Buddhist statues, probably carved around 600 years ago. I mean, you can see why these stories go viral. A river disappears, and suddenly there's a friggin' Buddha statue smiling at you. Or we can head to Spain. The Sal Reservoir normally looks like this. But in 2024, it pretty much dried up down to just 1% of its capacity. What do you think it revealed? Suddenly, the 11th century church and parts of the old village of Sant Roma de Sal were standing on dry ground again. They were flooded in 1966 for the reservoir. When the reservoir filled up again in 2025, only the church's belfry was left peeking out of the water. And yes, there's so much more. In 2019, when the Valdecañas reservoir dried up, something amazing happened. The Dolmen of Guadalperal, nicknamed in the media as Spanish Stonehenge. This prehistoric passage tomb, around 150 standing stones, was flooded by the Valdecañas reservoir in 1963. Its exposure created a set of opportunities and challenges for archaeologists. The site was now accessible to hordes of tourists and about to disappear underwater again, and likely to appear yet again in the future. So a plan was needed. The Spanish Ministry of Culture responded with emergency stabilization, recording, mapping, and once the water returned, underwater bathymetric survey. The monument's strange new circumstances ultimately demanded an entire protection strategy, governing research, conservation, and public access. And the site the public knew as Spanish Stonehenge is now designated by the Spanish government as a bien de interés cultural, granting it protections and a management plan. And that's the hidden problem with all these viral, incredible photographs. Archaeology likes stability. The sites and monuments, they reach homeostasis. Think about something excavated from a waterlogged site, like a shipwreck or the famous Vindolanda. A piece of wood can survive underground for centuries because its environment has stabilized. But if you expose the fragile wood and simply let it dry, it will shrink, crack, or collapse. Conservators have to labor for months or years to stabilize its structure. With accelerating climate change, archaeologists are regularly being confronted with sites whose environments are unstable. And now we're back to where we started the video. The Bronze Age city at Kamun in Iraqi Kurdistan. About 3,400 years ago, it was an important center of the Mitanni Empire. And like some of the examples above, Kamun didn't appear just once. In 2013, Dr. Hassan Ahmed Qasim led the first brief survey of the site. Only a few small finds were recovered, but that included a fragment of a cuneiform tablet. They knew it was important now. But the waters of the site rose again, and the site was inaccessible. However, with a severe drought in 2018, they had the chance to carry out a rescue excavation, and a Kurdish and German collaboration was established. What they found was a monumental Mitanni palace. Its mud brick walls were meters high. Rooms still contained traces of brightly colored wall paintings, and 10 cuneiform tablets alongside ceilings and cylinder seals in Akkadian and Babylonian helped establish the historical importance of this palace. One tablet provided the key details. Quote, All this belonging to the palace has been given the 11th of the month in Hutalsu in the city of Zahiku to be worked. The tablet tells us this is a palace in the city of Zahiku. We have the friggin' name. Zahiku was already known elsewhere from old Babylonian letters and documents, but it had been lost to time. Of course, the waters rose again, and Zahiku was lost yet again. Until, that is, 2022's drought, when the Mosul Reservoir was drained to provide water for people and crops. This time, the water level fell even more so. It was far more than the palace that was exposed this time. Much of the city was. And the archaeologists were ready this time. A Kurdish-German rescue team secured emergency funding, starting to excavate within friggin' days in January and February of 2022. And in just a few weeks, the history of Zahiku, was rewritten yet again. They excavated fortifications, terraces, and buildings made of mud brick. They uncovered an enormous multi-story storage building, which, I gotta say, I'm friggin' impressed. Multi-story buildings are just not that common to find reasonably intact in the archaeological record. Its sheer scale suggests enormous quantities of goods were being collected here. Exactly what you'd expect from a significant regional center of the Mitanni state. And look at these walls. These are friggin' sun-dried mud bricks, standing meters high. It is amazeballs preservation. The settlement had been hidden before the reservoir had been filled, under the topsoil of Kurdish agricultural fields. But the reservoir waters washed away the loose soil, exposing and thankfully not yet destroying these astounding archaeological monuments. The good preservation was also due to an earthquake destroying the Bronze Age city around 1350 BC, with the collapse from upper stories preserving lower rooms. That was bad luck for ancient people, but amazing luck for the archaeologists. Think about the weird set of coincidences that are needed for this site to be available for excavation. And guess what? The luck continued. The team also unearthed 5 intact pottery vessels dating to the period right after the earthquake, the Middle Assyrian period. And you know what? These pottery vessels, they were filled with cuneiform tablets. Over 100 of them. I mean, a big fat wow. They're extremely fragile, all of them. They're made of unfired clay. It's absolutely astounding that after 40 years underwater, they survived. And some of the tablets were still inside their clay envelopes. By the way, in my video on the Vesuvius papyri, I have a fantastic segment on how archaeologists use new scanning technologies to see inside similar clay envelopes, to read the cuneiform tablets inside without harming these envelopes themselves, which have their own text on them, so you don't want to cut into them. This is cutting-edge archaeology with high technology at its finest. Once these new tablets are deciphered, they'll tell us about the post-earthquake Assyrian city of Zahiku. So, the viral headlines millions saw online: Drought reveals 3,400-year-old lost city. That's absolutely true, but it's really only the beginning of the story. And to be honest, Khamun is only one site. Because when the Mosul Dam was built in the 1980s, it drowned an extraordinarily rich archaeological landscape on the floodplains of the Tigris River. Before construction, the archaeology of the region was poorly understood. A pre-construction survey identified 120 sites, and 63 of them were excavated before the dam was built and the area flooded. For decades, much of that landscape essentially disappeared underwater. But due to climate change and accelerating drought, it's an unstable situation. The waters temporarily recede and sites emerge, only for the waters to return. In 2018, drought lowered the reservoir enough to expose strips of land up to roughly 3 kilometers wide. Suddenly, sites archaeologists thought were gone for good were reappearing again. But it's not all good news. The researchers found that continual movement of reservoir water had often stripped away loose soil, and sometimes the upper archaeological deposits themselves, leaving ancient architecture exposed at the surface. The same process that is exposing these sites is destroying them. The Reland Archaeological Project, led by Dr. Paolo Scanzo, is working to mitigate and adapt to these circumstances. They pulled together essentially every major archaeological data set available for the reservoir: the old Iraqi surveys and excavations, modern pedestrian surveys and excavations, and a new remote survey with drones and satellites. Their expanded database identifies 275 archaeological sites directly affected by the reservoir: palaces, settlements, cemeteries, monuments, and more. An entire cultural landscape underwater. But they didn't stop there. Using aerial photography and declassified corona satellite imagery, they tracked the exposure patterns based on changes in water levels, identifying which sites are exposed under which conditions. The researchers found a clear relationship. Similar reservoir levels expose similar sites. So if you know the water level, you can begin predicting which archaeological sites are emerging. Look closely at this chart. Since 2005, the water table has decreased dramatically, the acceleration of climate change in one graph. This is the real story of the Mosul Reservoir. Archaeologists are adapting to these new challenging circumstances. You see the headlines from all the rescue excavations. Drought uncovers new tombs. This cemetery near Kanke has 43 impressive tombs telling us about the period after Alexander the Great. And this is Cham Pashaya, an early cemetery with 50 graves from over 4,000 years ago, well before Kamun's palace. Cham Pashaya is fragile, and the team is racing against looters, but it provides immense information about early urbanism in the region. The headlines make this new archaeology sound only like a good thing. It is and it isn't. These sites are at risk, but thankfully, local Kurdish archaeologists and international teams are doing an expert job of racing against the clock to document our threatened history. A whole world is drowned underwater. As rising sea levels submerge some parts, droughts expose other fragile windows into the past. Ice can preserve fragile archaeology for millennia. In September of 1991, two hikers in the Alps noticed a human body sticking out of the ice. They thought it was a recently deceased mountaineer. In fact, it was Ötzi the Iceman. He died over 5,000 years ago, during the Copper Age. Ötzi's story is one of his remarkable preservation. His body, the fact he was killed by his enemies, his clothes, his backpack and his weapons, his friggin' birch bark containers. I even have another video about the yeast that was preserved on his skin, cold-resistant yeast that might help us brew better beer today. Go check it out. For years, though, scholars thought that Ötzi's rapid burial in ice and preservation as a time capsule for over 5,000 years was a unique find that could never be surpassed. But that's only kind of true. Since Ötzi was discovered, archaeologists have begun finding a lot more things melting out of the ice.
The one that we are conducting here now is called a detailed survey, which means that we walk in parallel lines with 2 meters between each archaeologist.
Here's a arrow shaft, broken in many pieces. Also one down here, and then we come here, we can see the arrow head in iron.
In fact, a major reappraisal published by Dr. Lars Pila and his colleagues argued that Ötzi's context wasn't as perfect as scholars had imagined. The ice around him melted and reformed repeatedly during roughly the 1500 years after his death. The damage to his weapons and artifacts wasn't due to his fight to the death, but more likely due to these natural processes. So 30 years of ongoing glacial archaeology haven't just uncovered more amazing finds. They've changed how we understand the Iceman himself. And Ötzi wasn't alone. In the warm summer of 2003, another ice patch began melting at the Schneiderjach Pass in Switzerland. Yet again, a hiker spotted something sticking out of the ice. It was this Neolithic bow. And this was just the beginning. Soon, an archaeological team directed by Dr. Albert Hofner has recovered more than 900 artifacts from the Stone Age to the medieval period. Many of these were made from materials that usually disappear from archaeological sites: leather, wood, bark, plant fibers even. Around 2800 BC, people crossed this mountain carrying that yew-bow in a birch bark bow case with arrows made of wood from the wayfaring tree. They also left behind leather leggings. Like, wow. And the oldest finds here, like this fragment of a wooden bowl, are millennia older than Ötzi, going back 6,500 years. And the Bronze Age finds are no less impressive here, with another wooden bowl made from a composite of pine and willow woods, and these rings here from pleated twigs of birch and spruce. The rings were likely used as components for animal fences called ringzaun, like this historical example with similar rings seen to the right of the image. Collectively, these discoveries reveal something much bigger. Schneiderjagd was a forgotten alpine route used for at least 6,500 years by pastoralists to herd animals to mountain pastures in the summer, likely confirmed from the type of pollen recovered from nearby Lake Ifigsi. It correlates well with climate studies, as the dating of artifacts from the mountain pass line up with periods when the glaciers have retreated enough to make it accessible. Like with the receding waters we've seen, melting ice is uncovering brand new archaeological landscapes. Next, we can check out the southern Yukon in Canada. Since 1997, researchers have retrieved 207 artifacts and 1,700 animal remains from ice patches there. The Yukon Ice Patch Project became a collaboration between the territorial government and 6 Yukon First Nations, whose traditional territories contain these sites. These are hunting grounds, and normally all we'd find are stone points, and they found some just like these. But here, the ice preserves all those amazing organic bits: spear shafts, wooden bows and dart shafts, sinew bindings, antler barbed points. One really cool conclusion to pull out is what the finds tell us about changes in weaponry and hunting technology in the Yukon, from Stone Age implements all the way to this musket ball. The Yukon assemblage has revealed 3 different ways, for example, of constructing throwing darts, while also showing remarkable continuity in the basic technology for thousands of years. But around 1,200 years ago, there was a seismic shift. The bow and arrow ends up replacing the atlatl and the throwing darts, which disappear. With only stone tools, archaeologists would not have the level of detail here to make such strong conclusions. But this emerging field of glacial archaeology is spearheaded by the members of the Secrets of the Ice Project, headed by Dr. Lars Holger Pilla and Espen Finstad. They have a phenomenal YouTube channel, so be sure to go and subscribe to them.
Fantastisk. Jeg tror jeg skal få løfta den opp og ut med en gang. Jeg tar den over. Fy søren, det er funn, altså. Det er jo helt... Hva skal man si da? Man blir litt målløs. Men det er jo komplett ski med bindinga. Ser til med reparasjoner av liksom selve steget her. Du ser kuttmerker hvor de sikkert har reparert på bindingen. Det er mye historier bare innenfor den ene gjenstanden.
In the last 20 years, heavy melting in the mountains of southern Norway have exposed hundreds and thousands of archaeological objects. For example, this spectacular rawhide shoe from, and I'm not going to be able to pronounce this right, but it's from a mountain called Kvittingskjollen, or Kvittingskjollen, dating to roughly 1300 BC. I think I pronounced that okay. That crisis led to the development of the Glacier Archaeological Program, which has now recovered around 4,500 artifacts from 70 sites. This has become a genuinely new kind of archaeology, and archaeologists no longer wait for hikers to report a chance find. Unlike what you'd imagine in a field of glacial archaeology, the best preservation actually doesn't happen in glaciers. A large glacier moves, it flows downhill, and churns through material, destroying it. However, a smaller ice patch may remain essentially frozen to the ground, and that can preserve an arrow, a shoe, or a piece of textile for thousands of years. The first step, of course, is to map unmoving ice, distinguishing it from moving ice, using satellite imagery, aerial photos, and digital terrain models to identify ice masses that appear stable. Teams then wait for favorable melt conditions, usually in the late summer when seasonal snow cover is lowest. If finds begin appearing, archaeologists then systematically walk the lichen-free zones surrounding the retreating ice. Every artifact and animal remain is recorded. During extreme melting, teams wearing crampons and ropes even survey the ice itself, because an artifact that melts free can quickly be carried downslope by the meltwater. During the season, aerial photos or satellite imagery are used to see which ice patches are melting most to decide where teams should survey. We can see at Lendbrain the results of this approach. In 2011, with the ice melting, the first brief survey found something incredible.
Årene har ført til at hundrevis av de gamle gjenstandene har smeltet frem. Det er 4. august 2011. Arkeologene jobber systematisk langs overkanten av Lendbreen. De gjør et helt spesielt funn denne dagen.
Da er vi i overkant av Lendbreen. Vi har startet dokumentasjon og innsamling av et tekstilfunn.
Det som ved første øyekast ser ut til å være et sammentullet stoff, er en svært godt bevart kjortel fra 300-tallet etter Kristus.
Det er hele greia, det er helt fantastisk.
Norges eldste klesplagg, 1700 år gammelt. Stoffet er vevet av nøye utvalgt saueull. Snittet er enkelt, og flere lapper i baken viser at plagget har vært godt brukt. Lengden og formen viser at den ble laget til en spinkel mann eller gutt.
With this amazing find, they returned to survey the site and realized they had not found another hunting camp. Rather, this was an extraordinarily rich site. 800 artifacts, 150 animal bones, and more than 100 cairns, as well as a stone-built shelter. It was a lost mountain pass. Like Schneiderjach in Switzerland, it was probably also used for herding animals to summer upland pastures. The line of cairns here marked the route up the mountain. And the artifacts are absolutely amazing. And they tell us about more than just the people. Here, there's abundant horseshoes, horse bones, and even horse dung, providing traces of the pack animals. And beyond that tunic, there's a walking stick inscribed with runes, shoes, mittens, and knives that provide traces of the people that use this path. Like, what the heck? I have never seen anything like this. As I always say, the truth is in the trash. And when archaeologists mapped the cairns and the horse-related finds, the path upwards magically appeared. People traveled through this pass with their herds from the 3rd century AD all the way through the Middle Ages, with a peak of activity during the Viking Age. The route may have connected to larger networks carrying things like dried fish, reindeer products, pelts, and more between different areas of Norway. Lendbrain shows how these mountains weren't just remote barriers at the edges of society, but rather they were arteries of communication and exchange. And yes, of course, in a story about climate change, it gets worse. Because, well, that's our world, isn't it? The story at Langfon, another Norwegian ice patch, is another one of discovery, but also of how evidence is altered and transformed and destroyed. Here, archaeologists have recovered 290 animal remains and an astounding 68 arrows. The oldest of these dates back to around 4100 BC. Yes, over 6,000 years ago. And they mapped them out. And when you look at this map, immediately you start to see things are strange. The artifacts aren't sitting neatly where the hunters dropped them. They've scattered in pieces around the ice patch. One 1,500-year-old arrow was found 100 meters away from the modern ice edge. Only its wooden shaft remained. Ice deformation from melting and refreezing broke up the artifacts. Then meltwater and winds moved the lighter wooden shaft fragments downslope, but the heavier stone arrowheads didn't move as far. So melting ice isn't a pristine archive. And after melting away, normal decay also begins, starting that race against the clock for archaeologists. The exact speed of decay varies. Utzi's reassessment by Pila shows organic material can sometimes survive repeated short exposures longer than we once thought. But the direction is still one way. Context, organic materials, and data are lost over time. And as climate change intensifies and ice patches melt and don't reform, some of them are turning into what one team of researchers has nicknamed ghost patches. These are essentially a snow-covered former ice patch. The lovely organic artifacts we've seen will likely have disappeared, but there's still hope to discover scatters of stone tools and more. One advantage to these ghost patches is that they can be surveyed early in the season when snow melts, but before the ice patches have started melting. Pila has described glacial archaeology as being in an intensive field phase right now. As the ice retreats, the discoveries are getting older and older, and that's truly exciting. But this phase will only last as long as the ice does. And as we've seen, it's only a short window until ice patches become ghosts. So yes, climate change is revealing absolutely astounding lost archaeology. But this archive is disappearing rapidly as climate change accelerates further. Thankfully, there are experts doing their best to plan out a strategic approach to this situation. And on our coasts, rising sea levels and increasingly intense storms are reshaping archaeology in some surprising ways. Yet again, the process destroying an archaeological site is also the reason we recover it. This is Hapsborough, on the Norfolk coast of England. In May 2013, winter storms and coastal erosion stripped the sand away from the beach and exposed an intact layer of mud dating to the Ice Age. It doesn't look so impressive, does it? Even zooming in some, it's only some mud with some indentations. But look really closely, and what do you see? They're footprints, and not modern ones, not at all. The pollen in the sediment gives us the context.
So far, the pollen analysis is telling us that we're probably dealing with the end of a warm period, and the vegetation has changed from deciduous woodland to conifer-dominated woodlands. And this helps reassure us that we're probably dealing with an age of either 850,000 years ago or possibly 950,000 years ago.
So these are really, really old footprints. Both adult and children footprints are here, with estimated heights from about 93 centimeters to 1.73 meters. They're mostly moving south across this Ice Age mudflat, and these remain the oldest human footprints known in Europe. Scholars still argue over which hominin species left them. Unfortunately, the same coastal erosion that revealed this site also destroyed it. The research team led by Dr. Nick Ashton had only a couple of weeks to complete their excavation and documentation before they disappeared forever. We can trace a similar process on a larger scale if we head to Alaska to the site of Nunaluk. In 2007, locals from the Yupik village of Quinnahook contacted archaeologists after finding archaeological artifacts on the beach. This led to a long-term collaborative project between Yupik leadership and an international team based out of the University of Aberdeen in Scotland. Again, the frozen, waterlogged conditions have preserved amazing finds: wood, grass, leather, masks, and more. I highly recommend checking out the digital museum at nunaluk.org for a deep dive. The excavation team also has an active blog at nunaluk.wordpress.com showing spectacular finds from each season. More than 100,000 objects have been recovered, creating the largest collection of pre-contact Yupik artifacts ever excavated. The excavation is a great example of collaboration between local groups and international teams. This YouTube video by co-director Dr. Carlotta Hillerdahl gives a sense of the project environment and the amazing finds. But the problem is that while erosion revealed the site, it's also rapidly destroying it. These two images show the devastation to the site. This is August of 2024, and this on the right is October 2025. That archaeology is gone. It's yet again another race against the destructive forces of climate change. The collaborative team has tried to stem off the erosion with sandbags and more, but they're facing rising sea levels and typhoons. In the last 2 decades, the shoreline has moved in by several dozen meters, destroying huge areas of the site. After the Typhoon Halong destroyed much of the coastline, local resident Warren Jones described the site as if a bomb had hit. Archaeologist Rick Knecht said, quote, "It's like you took our museum and sprinkled it out on the beach." So while the team has recovered and documented so much, this site remains under severe threat due to climate change. While Hillerdahl and the team note that, quote, since no systematic survey has been undertaken, it is impossible to estimate the number of sites under direct threat by coastal erosion and other climate effects. But one silver lining here is that, quote, the interest generated from this community project has already led to neighboring villages to contact Quinnahook for advice on how to set up similar projects of their own. The Nunaluk project and the fantastic archaeological collection it has produced have sparked an interest in archaeology previously absent in the region. This is an extraordinary discovery, but it's surely the exception. Many more sites are found in uninhabited or less accessible areas, and they are equally a threat. Unfortunately, sometimes the past just disappears. Everywhere we've looked so far has one advantage. Somebody noticed before it disappeared, and archaeologists and volunteers were able to actually do something about it. Unfortunately, the biggest impact that climate change will have on archaeology will simply be widespread destruction. Sometimes we don't even see this destruction happening around us. If we head to Greenland, we can find researchers tracking the damage that's occurring underground. Under Greenland's beautiful turf are archaeological middens, and these middens are a treasure trove for us archaeologists. Over thousands of years of people's trash. And the preservation here is just amazing. Look at the piece of wood and the feather on the right. Greenland's cold soils have preserved organic archaeological remains from Paleo-Inuit, Norse, and later Inuit communities that would normally have decomposed centuries ago. But as we've seen, their continued preservation depends on a stable environment around them. And sure, Greenland is suffering from coastal erosion. But here, there is a more insidious problem. The cold climate here slows microbial activity. Similarly, the waterlogged and frozen soils can restrict the oxygen that microbes need. As these soils warm and stay thawed for longer, or as they dry out, the organic material within them starts to disappear. Jorgen Hollison and his team have been tracking this process over the last 25 years. More recently, they investigated 3 major Norse settlements, and I'm going to butcher their pronunciations: Kakortakuluk, Igaliku, and Kasiarsuk. They dug test pits at all 3 of them into archaeological middens. From the article, quote, no preserved organic artifacts were discovered, and only the very last remnants of bones could be identified as reddish-colored markings in the soil. Hidden underground, Greenland is slowly shifting from being one of the world's best contexts for archaeological preservation to only a fucking reddish stain surviving. And as I said at the beginning, this gets even worse. Take Chanchan in Peru. Founded over 1,000 years ago as the capital of the Chimu state. It is an absolutely breathtaking site with monumental structures, courtyards, and beautiful relief art, and a range of beautiful artifacts that have been excavated from the site too. But the standing monuments themselves present a real problem. They are constructed out of adobe mud brick, unfired earth. It's the largest adobe city in the world. But it is under threat from water. Chanchan is one of UNESCO's key climate change case studies for this reason. The increased rainfall from El Niño events combined with climate change are threatening the very fabric of the site. In these recent photos, you can literally see the walls melting and mud bricks dissolving. It's not just rain either. The groundwater rises during El Niño events, and increased moisture encourages salt contamination and vegetation growth. Chanchan has been on UNESCO's list of World Heritage in danger since 1986. Accelerating climate change has only worsened this situation. In 2014, ahead of a major El Niño event, the managers of the site installed thousands of meters of protective roofing. The modern roofs over these structures might not be pretty, but they're needed to protect what's even prettier underneath. Local conservators worked tirelessly to stabilize the walls from these threats, and they installed drains to channel runoff water away from the monuments. There's a large conservation and management plan in place using traditional methods and cutting-edge technology to try and save parts of the site. But of course, you can't put the entire site in a museum. Erosion is already obstructing archaeological understanding of the site as structures have suffered significant decay. We're watching these monuments slowly dissolve before our eyes. As well, while heat waves and droughts continue, wildfires grow in strength and threaten archaeology around the world. As a student, when I was excavating at the Bronze Age site of Mycenae in 2007, wildfires were raging so badly nearby that it was snowing ash into our trenches. But just a few weeks ago, Mycenae was threatened yet again, this time with a massive wildfire that stretched right up to the walls of the citadel. And in 2025, a wildfire burning in Fillingdales Moor in North England devastated around 18 square kilometers of land. 27 scheduled monuments and 6 listed structures lay within the affected area. The burning stripped away the protective peat, it damaged archaeological deposits, and left newly exposed remains vulnerable to erosion. Interestingly, the fire even revealed new archaeology, prehistoric cut marks that had been hidden behind the vegetation. So once again, climate change only reveals archaeology because the thing protecting it is being destroyed. Rapa Nui, also known as Easter Island, is one of the places in the world where the risk of climate change to archaeology is immediately apparent. In October 2022, a wildfire burned through Rano-Raraku, the quarry landscape where hundreds of moai remain. UNESCO identified 22 statues with serious alterations from the fire. But even more of a threat to Rapa Nui is sea level rise. Much of the island's breathtaking archaeology is on the coast. There are more than 200 ahu along Rapa Nui's coastline. These are the ceremonial stone platforms, and many of them carry the island's famous statues that look inwards. Most of these were constructed parallel to the shore, with massive seaward retaining walls. Sea level rise isn't just some future abstract problem. It's happening right now, with clear damage already occurring. Dr. Noah Paoa and his team have been tracking the impacts of inundation on the archaeology of Rapa Nui. Look here at Ahu Vai Uri. After an extreme swell in May 2021, part of the retaining wall has collapsed. And this is Ahu Kopekatai Ati. In August 2025, that hole that you see besides the retaining wall, that's a sinkhole that's going to damage this monument even further in the future. Paoa compares Rapa Nui's harbors during extreme ocean conditions with normal water levels. These aren't computer-generated futures. This is happening right now. 4 of the Ahu are already impacted. And the team is mapping and modeling what will come next, with 67 of these coastal Ahu. A 2025 study that you see mapped here shows that Ahu Tongariki will most likely be impacted by 2080. You say, what is Ahu Tongariki? Well, it's only the largest Ahu on the island, with 15 of the most impressive moai statues there. One of them weighs 86 tons. It is the heaviest statue on the island. Rapa Nui's iconic coastal archaeology is at severe risk. We can even head to the coast of Scotland. Between 1996 and 2010, coastal surveys examined around 35% of the coastline and recorded roughly 11,500 heritage sites. 11,500 sites, and we probably need to multiply that by 3. More recent surveys, conducted by a combination of experts and local volunteers, applied models of future coastal vulnerability to decide where archaeologists should look first. In only 23 days of fieldwork in northeastern Scotland in 2022, SCAPE checked 140 kilometers of vulnerable coastline and found 619 sites. There is simply no realistic scenario where archaeologists can excavate every single endangered site. And this doesn't even include famous sites like the phenomenal Neolithic village at Skara Brae and its environs, which are threatened with destruction. A seawall currently protects the main part of the site, but others are eroding away. Archaeology around the world is threatened by these issues, and none of them are isolated problems. Here's the Roman site of Tapasa in Algeria, along the coast. Here's the Swahili city of Kilwa Kisiwani, on an island off of Tanzania. It's along the coast. Across Africa, a 2022 study led by Dr. Michalis Voudoukas mapped 284 major coastal heritage areas. Humans have always lived and built along the coasts. At the study's baseline, there's already 56 sites at risk to damage from a severe coastal event. By 2050, the modeling raises that to over 50% of the sites, with more than 190 of them at severe risk. And just this year, researchers have produced something archaeologists have never had before: a high-resolution global map of low-lying World Heritage sites threatened with flooding from not just the ocean, but rivers and rainfall. Many of these sites, natural, cultural, historical, and modern, are all under threat. They include sites as diverse as the Sydney Opera House or the ancient city of Uruk in Iraq. All 386 of these sites won't disappear tomorrow, but the map and dataset gives researchers spatial data to ask much better questions. Which heritage is exposed, to what hazard, and how soon? And where should limited resources go first? And that is where climate change is forcing archaeology into some uncomfortable decisions. We can simply not excavate every threatened coastline, nor every site that appears during a drought. We can't refrigerate Greenland's soil, nor can we stop Norway's ice patches from melting. We can't put the entire site of Chan Chan in a museum, nor can we relocate all of Rapa Nui's coastal monuments. There's millions of archaeological sites around the world. How many of them are truly at risk? All these surveys and models can help us identify the most vulnerable sites and focus limited resources on those that we consider important enough. But excavation is expensive, and archaeology, higher education, and research funding is being cut, and cut. Ultimately, some sites will be prioritized, and many, many more will be lost forever. Some of those will be sites that we already know and many of us love. But too many of them will be completely obliterated before we ever discover them. We'll never know the ancient people who lived there. Their stories will remain unsung. Unfortunately, the risks aren't only to archaeological sites and artifacts, but also to the archaeologists and people trying to save them. This is my friend and colleague, Vangelis Fiorakis. I excavated with him and his wife, Dr. Melissa Eby, at the site of Azoria on Crete for 5 years. Vangelis spent his entire life excavating sites on Crete, and 3 years ago, during an excavation, he passed away from heat stroke. Kalu paradiso, Vangelis. Vangelis is one of 3 archaeologists who have died from heat stroke in this decade alone. This seems to be something new. I couldn't find any other examples in my research of archaeologists dying from heat stroke in the previous 50 years. With our climate getting warmer, there should be more systematic research on this in the future. Now look, archaeology is not an easy field. I possibly even got my melanoma from being out in the sun too much. I've been battered by spiky brambles and sharp rocks. I even fought a poisonous viper in a trench once. But Vangelis is the only archaeologist I personally know who died in the field. Our climate is warming. It's weird. Usually the news is bad. Corrupt politics, violent war, brutal criminals, and more. The news is relentlessly bad sometimes. But somehow the fucking headlines about climate change and archaeology that go viral seem to focus on the good. The mysterious crop marks, or the cities that emerge from the waters, or the miraculous finds appearing from melting ice. And that shit is super cool. I am in awe of these discoveries and the amazing work and scholarship that went into telling them. But they don't tell the full story. The story of climate change and archaeology is a slow-moving tragedy. But it's not all bad. It's also a story of resilience. Archaeologists are developing new methods to predict which patch of ice to target, which site will emerge from the water, and which field to fly over. Communities are joining with scholars to fight against the clock to preserve their heritage, to uncover it before the sea comes rushing in, to conserve it before it melts away, to upload it to the internet and share it with the world in pride. This is who we are. We're all humans, and all of us have always been amazing and unique. And we won't give up before this immense challenge that faces us all. I firmly believe it's important to learn from our history. It helps us empathize with our fellow travelers. It gives us context for the decisions we make about the future. And there's one last message from archaeology that I think we have to listen to. Because sometimes what a drought reveals isn't an ancient city or a lost artifact. It's a warning to those of us who see it. For centuries, people living along rivers carved the dates of catastrophic low water years into the rocks that are normally hidden below the surface. We call them hunger stones. This one on the Elbe River near Pirna in Germany goes back to 1707. Surprise, surprise, it's visible again this year. And these weren't just stories that people invented after the fact. Researchers have compared the carvings on hunger stones with historical river gauges. These marks are recording the minimum water levels of individual drought years with surprising accuracy. And on a hunger stone across the Elbe in Decin in the Czech Republic, somebody eventually added a message to those of us in the future. In German it reads, "Wenn du mich siehst, dann wein du." If you see me, weep. I don't think we should weep. I think we should do something about this. Things are fucking shit. We should get angry. We should be fighting to mitigate climate change and adapt to it, not just for archaeology, but in every sphere of our lives. We should hold these politicians' feet to the fucking fire. And we should be helping those that are actually fighting it right now. If you're watching, I am providing a list of links down below to the organizations that I've covered in this video. The archaeologists on the front line who are fighting against the impacts of climate change. Please consider donating or supporting them. And if you love archaeology, look to your own neighborhood. I'm sure there are museums, excavations, and more that could use your help. It's never too late to become an archaeologist, even as a hobby. And as you can see, these threats are everywhere, even in our backyards. Love and archaeology to you all.
Rhymes and riddles, tickle, tickle, giggles, squiggle, jiggle, fiddle, flint, untibble, rhymes and